Hi, welcome to Hope in the Light of Suicide. I'm Tammy White. I'm the founder of the Bobby White Foundation, and I have invited a new guest in this week, Miss Bonnie Bush. And we're going to sit here for a little while and find out more about her and what she does. I met Bonnie at a networking group, and she's actually become part of our team for Art for Hope. So I wanted to bring her and her information to you guys. We're just going to sit here and chat. But first, last week I dedicated the show to my mom. It was her birthday, and the day we taped the show, I got some other really sad news that a professor of mine, Dr. Mike Smith, passed away suddenly. And I wanted to dedicate this show to him. That's me and his wife Carol and Mike. The last time I was able to see them before COVID, they had moved to Fort Myers, and we met up in Punta Gorda and had dinner together. And he was actually my professor for when I went back to school to get my bachelor's degree, and because of him, I went on to get my master's degree. And his wife Carol was one of our advisors at the time. Pasco Hernando State College was Pasco Hernando Community College at the time, and a lot of the major universities around the Tampa Bay area had satellite campuses at the junior college or local college, and it was Hodges University that he worked for, and that's where I ended up going and getting my degrees. And he really taught me a lot about speaking in front of people, and one of those really good mentors turned friend, and that really helped me, that I wouldn't have thought that back I think 2008 to 2012, 14, that I'd be using the skills that I learned from going back to school to what I'm doing now with the show and the foundation. And I just really want to thank him and his wife. I remember very distinctly right after Bobby passed, I was at Home Depot with my aunt, and I get a phone call from Carol as soon as she had heard that Bobby had passed away. And it's just those connections that you build that unknowingly, but he was a super awesome professor, and any of his students will tell you the same thing. So anyways, I wanted to dedicate this show to him. So onward, we got to do our other housekeeping stuff. Of course, we need to thank John and Cage from Area 52 Media Group. Another one, we can't do any of this stuff alone, so it takes really special people, especially with what our subject matter is, and without their support and dedication, we couldn't be doing this either. And then, of course, Lynn Gaston with the mortgage firm, one of our sponsors. Anything mortgages, man, this woman is like the best of the best, from one end of the spectrum to the other. If you're just beginning and you want to find out where you're at, what you need to do to get pre-qualified, maybe your credit's not all that good, and she can guide you step by step to get everything put in place to get a mortgage, second mortgage. I mean, seriously, this woman is awesome. So we want to thank them, of course. And we have coming up Art for Hope, which is September 7th. And as I said, Bonnie joined our team this year. It, of course, is at the Hilton Garden Inn from 6 to 9 p.m. We do have art for pre-sale, which I started putting up on the gallery page, Art for Hope page. Kind of been sharing it. I think I put it on the gallery page first and then send it to the page for the show, the page for the foundation. Pages everywhere. But anyway, you can find them. There's a couple of pieces that I'm featuring this week. This one here is called Addicted to Love by Dennis Mackay. And I put in a detail picture, the rose in the bottom left corner as you're looking at it. That is, I actually hand cut that in the mat. So everything is custom. So that's one of the pieces. And then the other one is from a opera series by Raphael Oblinsky. This is one of the pieces also that's available. Both these pieces are serigraphs, limited editions. So these will be available at the show unless they pre-sale before the show. So we'll have a lot of pieces that are available, and you can contact me at the foundation or even at the gallery for more information on pieces that are available for pre-sale. So our new team member for Art for Hope, I'll do a little introduction here, is Bonnie Bush. She is a trauma-informed crisis intervention expert, coach, speaker, energy artist, and organizational trainer. She spent nearly 30 years working in nonprofits in suicide, crisis and power-based violence protection, and intervention and healing. However, it was the death of her oldest child at the young age of 26, the pain and suffering and eventual healing journey that inspired her to create DogStar Transformational Coaching and Consulting in 2016. She wanted to help others have hope and be supported in healing, as well as teaching others to provide trauma-informed care through individual coping, safety plans, and integrated daily well-being routines. When she's not working, she likes spending time with her daughter and granddaughter, growing herbs, spending time in nature, especially the salt water, which we have plenty around here. She's an avid animal lover, and you put on here, is it paw parent or paw rent?
Parent. Paw. Like paw.
Well, that's what I thought, but then that's why I kept it that way.
Yeah.
To Jupiter, the dog star, a standard poodle who is being trained to do crisis intervention and therapy work with Bonnie. So welcome, Bonnie.
Thank you for having me here.
I'm so glad that we were able to get you on the show, and the timing is really pretty good. So when I first met Bonnie at one of our networking groups, and I don't know how she could do it for as long as she did. You worked with one of the crisis lines in Tampa Bay, correct?
I did. I was there. I started out on the lines part-time within probably a couple of months because of my background. I became a supervisor and eventually managed that program for over 10 years. And it wasn't just managing a phone line. It was, sometimes jumping on without necessarily being prepared and keeping a workforce well and able to do that. They could come to me, no, we can't go to lunch, can't take a break because we're too busy. And I'm like, that's why you need to take a break now, to really take care of themselves. And so through that, I got early training in trauma-informed care and more mental well-being that led to psychological first aid. And a lot of my background and my mentor actually he inspired me. Dr. Robert Macy trained the whole crisis center. And aside from being in mental health and that being his specialty, and having an international trauma center that went all over the world helping people heal after disasters and suicide pockets, he was a dancer and an energy artist and a martial artist. And so that inspired me, and you just never know how those things are going to help you, but for sure that's what helped me get through my daughter Wendy's death, and it has inspired me to help others. It helped me as I grew in the organization and went from managing the crisis lines to becoming part of the the wellness and development programs So I went from managing, 25, 27 people to being responsible for over 200 people being well in the workplace, including sexual assault nurse examiners, because we were the certified rape crisis center for Hillsborough County, had a basic life support ambulance company, and clinicians, plus the hotline, and anybody else that walked in the door. I had the first couple of weeks of training for every single person, just to make sure that they were ready to do that kind of work, and to make sure that they understood that they were expected to be well. That was part of their self-management.
I couldn't even imagine.
Yeah.
I can't imagine. I mean, it's hard enough just on a daily basis for me, let alone working a crisis line, keeping yourself healthy, and making sure that everybody around you, as your team grew, as the experience got more, that's a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot, and I learned early on, I fooled myself for quite a few years after my daughter passed away. People talk about addictions, and sometimes we don't identify them very well. Right. Because my addiction was watching Rays baseball every single night for 4 years. I think the first couple years I only missed 1 or 2 games, either in person or on television. I was like, everybody knew me as the #1 Rays fan. People would bring me Rays blankets and memorabilia and license plate, license tags and all kind of little tchotchkes kind of stuff for Rays. And I had, a collection of cowbells. I still have the cowbells. Still love the Rays. But that was my escape every night, and it was unhealthy. And that's one of the reasons that now I teach balance. I think I know if we focus on one particular thing all the time without taking care of ourselves and looking at other areas of our lives and all those other things that help protect us and keep us well, that we get off balanced.
Oh yeah, and it's very easy to do because it's your escape. You can, and I did something similar about 3 years ago when I found myself going into a depression, and just to sit mindlessly and watch TV for hours. Yeah. I mean, it's just mindlessly, because it gets you can still sit there and watch something, but it blocks out all the rest that's going on in your brain that seems like it's driving you crazy, and you can just sit there so mindlessly, and it's easy to get into that, and it can be much harder to get out, depending on who you are and how you relate to different situations. Fortunately for me, about 5 months into it, I recognized what I was doing, and a couple of the other things that were happening, such as, which is really important, I started eating more processed foods, which we didn't do, and that just fed into it, and it does it immediately. It just feeds right into that. But fortunately, I was able to recognize it, to start to pull myself out of it. But sometimes it's still a struggle now, and it's not anything that I have ever had before.
Yeah, it happens, and it's really interesting, because when you recognize that you're doing these things, and society makes us feel shamed for doing these things, but yet at the same time it nurtures the Netflix binge watching, for instance, or watching the news every night at 6. I know I grew up with that, or reading the paper every single morning, and that's not my practice at all. And what's interesting is once you realize this and become determined that you're not gonna eat this processed food, and you start to feel better, and little by little. That's why I always say, everybody likes to talk about being your best self every day. Sometimes it's just being a little bit better. It's baby steps. They talk about the old adage about eating the elephant one bite at a time. Well, I have no desire to eat an elephant.
Me neither.
But those little baby steps, those little changes that we can just work into our routines that make us better, and then suddenly we don't want those processed foods. And I know for me, that was my journey. I lost like 70 pounds. I had gotten up to well over 200 pounds. And I'd always been active and athletic. And that's another thing that happens sometimes in grief too. And when we just become disembodied, and we don't do anything active. We sit and we watch TV or baseball or whatever it is. We're like tunnel vision. And we don't move our bodies, and that helps move, the trauma out of our bodies. It helps shake off that energy, but it's so easy to just get stuck in that, and people don't realize it, and then people feel ashamed that that's happened to them.
Right.
It took me a long time to say, hey, I was addicted to baseball, and really to be able to say that's what it is.
Right.
And sometimes it's even more than that. It's chemical addiction, but it can be food addiction too.
Oh, it's not limited to alcohol, drugs, food, TV, video games.
Yeah.
I mean, these kids these days, their attention spans, and it's just video games, and they go through withdrawal if you take it away from them, I mean, it's the same, it's, very similar.
I see that in the transformational world because people are so used to instant gratification that they want life changes, and they want them now.
Right.
And it's a process. It takes a little bit of time, to do that. I think it's the College of London says that the average, it could be anywhere from 18 to 66 days for someone, depending on the individual to make those changes. And I know that my changes, my daughter passed away in 2007, and I met my mentor and started studying and learning a lot of things in 2011. And things really started taking hold. I didn't start my business until 2016, but I could look back and see that path of gradual change and things that had made me a better person, and actually get back into my body, lose some weight, eat healthier. I stopped eating meat. It was purely spiritual practice. I hardly ever drink anymore, a glass of wine, beer here and there, It's a process. And I think that again, you mentioned with your mentor and your professor, we're herd animals. We're made to help each other,
right,
and to do that. But so often we end up isolating, or people end up, it's almost like they seem to self-select being isolated, but it's not that they self-select doing that so much as people don't know what to say around them.
Right. Yeah, and it's difficult. Were you still working at the crisis center when you lost your daughter?
Oh yeah, I went through 18 months running a suicide and crisis line, and watching her. She had a very rare form of cancer called cortical adrenal cancer. So the adrenal glands, here are the kidneys, the adrenal glands sit right on top of it. And so she started having symptoms like Cushing symptoms, and it took from, like, she had symptoms in the year before, and then in February she started really having hot flashes and being really symptomatic, and it took from February until May to diagnose her.
Wow.
And they didn't know what tests to run. Thank goodness my partner at the time was in the medical field, and would write down, these are the tests that you need to do. Okay, this came back this. Let's do this. Let's do this. So we were really fortunate that happened, but all that time for a very, very aggressive, the average lifespan for anybody that has cortical adrenal cancer is 18 months.
Oh, goodness.
And the average age is usually female in their early to mid 40s. Wendy was 26. She was 26 years old, and it progressed, and she lived exactly 18 months.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But 18 months is 8 and 1 is 9. 9 is a finishing number.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine going through that, dealing with your job, which is trauma the whole entire time you're there, and then losing your daughter, going through that grief process while still doing the same thing, trauma, trauma, trauma every day.
Yeah. I don't think I could have done it in a different environment, maybe not even in a different department, but I had a phenomenal director, phenomenal boss that had suffered trauma. She's had trauma in her life as well, and she was one of those people, you do what you need to do.
Right.
You take care of you, take care of your family. And I can't say I had some bad days. I can remember getting a phone call that Wendy needed to be taken to Moffitt's equivalent of the emergency room, and I had to get in someone's face 3 times that I'm leaving. I need someone to provide oversight because I'm not going to just leave these people stranded that are on the phone, because if we did get a call, a suicide call in, usually someone would listen in so that they could get information if we had to call intervention.
Right.
So I wasn't going to leave someone stranded that could actually die, or someone could actually take their life, versus someone that needed to go to the emergency room. It was triage. It was simple triage, and you have to learn to think really fast.
Right.
And I like to think things through a lot of times, but in that situation, it's really interesting. That's one of the things I've found that's a strong point for me, is in disaster situations, crisis situations, intervention situations, things just come to me, and I don't know that it's coming from me. Sometimes I'm pretty sure it's coming through me and coming from someplace a little with there's a little more higher consciousness, higher vibe than me.
You told me a story the other day. Do you remember that story that you told me
about the men?
Yeah.
In Mazarick Town, however people want
Everybody
to pronounce it.
pronounces it
different, and it was a story I would tell a lot, and I don't want to trigger anyone, that might be on the show, but it's a good ending. It's a really happy ending. And it was one evening, and the phone would ring and the person would hang up. The phone would ring and the person would hang up. And finally, he would say, I want to talk to somebody that cares. I just want to talk to somebody that cares before I kill myself. And then he would hang up. Nobody could speak to him fast enough. And so finally I'm like, okay, I don't care whose phone it rings to. The next time he calls, I want that call. And so he called back. Thank goodness. I'm really glad that he called back, So he called back, and I'm like, don't hang up, stay on the line. And I remember his name, and his name was Danny. And Danny had gotten home from work that night, and it was just way too quiet in his house. And he'd already put, sawhorse in the back of his truck. He was gonna kill himself, but he wanted somebody to know, and just somebody to care. So, as long as there's breath, there's hope. And there was something inside of him. I don't know what it was. Something inside of him, and he called. And I'm like, well, why was it so quiet? And his wife had left him. And not only had she left him, but she took their little son. I believe he was about between 2 and 3 years old. And he missed that daddy every night when he came home from work. So he came home to an empty house. And it just got to be too much for him. And so I don't remember what he had, I think I maybe had asked him the things that he liked to do, that he might fill his time with. But I do remember something about fishing and baseball and a few things like that. And I'm like, well, you talk about your son, you talk about fishing and baseball. And, if you thought about, your son, just because something happened between you and your wife, what about your relationship with your son? And I don't like to make people feel guilty when they feel like they need to die. I'm not going to make somebody feel guilty from whatever feelings they're already experiencing. But I was able to talk to this young man and talk about his son, and you could just hear And all of this is by phone. You don't get to do this. I don't get to like see here talking. You don't see the expressions, but you get to where you can almost hear the affect change. I call it turning the corner.
You have to listen really well.
Yeah, and I could hear it in his voice, and he was trying not to let me know that he started sobbing, but we talked about his son, like, what about taking him fishing in his first baseball game and those kind of things. And he goes, oh yeah, and you could just hear him just come back, just start to come back. And it was just every single time. It's like sometimes you're so tired, and I always, when I train, it was like, that last person you talk to, it might be at midnight, you might be getting off shift at midnight, and then it's 11:59 and the phone rings. That person doesn't need to know that's your last call. It's got to be as fresh as that first call, because that person on the other end of the phone could be your family member, it could be your neighbor, it could be anybody. Think about the people that you love and that you care about. And when you start to lose that, I don't want you on my lines.
Yeah.
Same thing with EMTs, I've taught them the same thing, and nurses, to try to prevent burnout, and for people to have that self-recognition, to be able to say, hey, I'm fried. I wanted them to have permission. But anyway, that young man hopefully is still alive. Danny, if you're out there, I'm glad you made that decision not to die that night, because I do know statistically that when we can stop people, they usually will tell you they're glad that they didn't end it, but it doesn't always end that way.
No, it doesn't always end that way. And you're right. If you can stop it before it happens, and even those that have attempted and failed, which is a really awful term to use, they also say the same thing, that they were glad that they didn't go through with it.
Yeah.
That it was a mistake.
Yeah.
So if we can, get them to that part, and timing is everything.
Yeah.
Especially at those critical points, especially when you're on the crisis line, or even you guys out there. It's the same. It's the same. You just be there, talk, and it's not a long period of time. It can be. Sometimes it can be a long period of time, but it can be a short period of time to just get them past that. Yeah. That whatever is pulling them in. It does work. It can work.
Yeah. Get them out of their environment. What do you like to do?
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's something you hate doing, do it. Or I always tell people, never leave anybody that you even suspect that might be suicidal, to leave them alone. And don't be afraid to ask. Directly ask. A lot of people say, well, are you thinking of hurting yourself? And they'll go like, no. They're thinking of killing themselves. We have to be very direct.
You have to be direct. Yeah,
direct.
We tell people that all the time, And don't be afraid to be direct, even if you're wrong.
Yeah.
Because, and we say it all the time, I'd rather have somebody pissed off at me than have to go to their funeral.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would rather them say, you're crazy, what are you thinking? Why would you think I would do that? I would rather have that happen than to miss it and to go to their funeral, because it happens.
Yeah.
And if we're not direct, and it's going to fall through the cracks at times, because unfortunately those that are intent on taking their lives, sometimes we're not going to stop it.
Yeah.
And that's something that's too, it kind of plays into the stigma a little bit. I should have been able to stop it. I should have been able to see it. I should have this, I should have that. And you can't go and do those shoulda, woulda, couldas, because more than likely it wouldn't have made a difference anyways.
Even the people that work in suicidology and traumatology that work in the field, they'll go back and forth on, are there signs? You can teach people all the signs. The one that people miss a lot is when someone, after being kind of down and depressed, they all of a sudden seem happier and have more joy. And people miss that a lot of times.
Well, yeah, because they think that they've come out of it. They're gonna be okay. Which oftentimes they've made that decision.
Yeah.
And the reason that they're in that, it's almost like a euphoria because they know what they're gonna do, that soon this is all gonna be over.
Yeah.
And that's the reason for this happiness, and everything seems all right, like how they used to be. And that's a hard one to get, too.
It really is. And if they're intent, like you said, if they're really intent on doing that, even when they're questioned a lot of times, you're going to be lied to. And so that's when we try to keep a close eye, but we have life, and just sometimes we miss it. And it's really hard. And I think one of the, we see it a lot too when substances have been used, and that takes the edge off. That's part of the plan a lot of times.
Oh, it is, because it makes it easier. I mean, I personally know of several suicide deaths that alcohol and drugs were involved, because it takes the edge off, and it makes them, I don't know what, it makes them feel like they're Superman. It's easier for them. In my own case, my husband's blood alcohol content was off the charts, and a lot of people in our circle, particularly his friends, they just couldn't believe that he was able to do what he did with the blood alcohol level that he had. But then he probably wouldn't have done what he did if it wasn't for that.
Yeah, I know that veterans, and especially first responders, law enforcement, firefighters, even paramedics, that alcohol is used more times than not. Their percentages rise greatly with substance use when there's been suicide and they've taken their own life.
Oh yeah,
because that's unfortunately in a lot of the circles, that's their coping, and that's what they do, and that's even their thing to do together, to go hang out and have a few beers. So.
Well, like working at the trauma center, it's their life, day in and day out. The majority of it is dealing with crises and traumas and things that somebody like me normally doesn't have to deal with or put up with. Or, I mean, we had a family that we helped. Actually, we had her mom on the show a couple months ago. Next month, I think, is coming up on a year from her death by suicide. Her partner is a state patrol officer, and they had 2 young children, and he came home and found her. And fortunately, he was able to take, some time off from work, but they wanted him to come back to work when he wasn't ready to come back to work. And he shared with me, he goes, I don't want to deal with everybody else's traumas and crises. I've got my own right here. He had 2 young children now to take care of, and being the one that found his partner, and the kids were home at the time, but he's back out on the road, and he's a young guy. He's in his 30s, and he's back out there again. But I just could not even imagine. I mean, I myself can't handle myself on sometimes, and to have to to deal with people, because I know when I've had to have Florida Highway Patrol to my house, when, like the last crash that we had, 60 feet of my fence coming out, and plus Florida Highway Patrol, they don't have enough officers in our area. So I just, the stress, and I can't imagine.
I know. I always joke around, especially during COVID. There was all the signs everywhere. Heroes work here. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, yeah, those capes that you want to put on all of them, they're strangling them, they're choking them. They're overworked, because we see the uniform or we see the position, and that's what we think of, that they're heroes. And think about this: next time you get stopped for a ticket, that's a human being, and maybe that person is a little cranky because they're doing their very best to hold it together. They may, have lost someone in their family. They may have a sick child. They may be going through a raging divorce. We don't know.
Right.
And so we
they're
forget.
people too, just like us.
Yeah, but we really forget that. So, you can serve all the lunches and all the food you want, and that's really cool, and everybody's very grateful. But to really stop and thank and be a little tender, a little compassionate with them, and that's hard.
It is hard. My nephew was a Pasco County sheriff for about 7 years, and it really took a toll on him mentally. And when him and his wife Amy started having a family, he left. He just didn't want to. He couldn't do it no more. His little girls and his family were more important, because it was starting to take a really huge toll on his mental health.
Yeah.
And he had left the sheriff's department prior to Bobby's death, but yeah, he went from there to, he was even worked for a security company, but he still had to carry a gun, and he didn't want to do that. And he worked for them for quite a while, and he's finally out of all that completely, and now he's selling houses with his wife,
which is great. I mean, I used to get calls just because I was a lot of time the one that, if there was a bad call that some of our EMTs or any of our staff had taken, or experiences with the EMTs especially, and we're just talking about basic life support, that it was usually a domestic violence or a pediatric case. Mm-hmm. We're talking about a lot of younger people that might have little kids, and aside from their families being really important to them and having to carry a weapon for law enforcement, but on top of it, having to face, life. And, so my thing is, I'm always talking about people, most people in this world, they just prefer to go on. They don't like these sensitive topics. They'd rather think that there's a unicorn parked in everybody's driveway.
Well, I always kind of thought that. Yeah. My husband used to say that I always saw the world through rose-colored glasses, no matter what was going on. But, and I still kind of want that. But you get the seriousness of life with it, and it's good and it's really, really bad parts.
Well, I think the way to keep both for me has been to just be very aware and to pay attention. I'm a people watcher, and just to pay attention and to be able to ask someone, "Are you okay?" And not necessarily in front of a bunch of people, but
Right.
just to say, "Hey, got a minute?" Or before we're done with this, can we talk? Or
Right.
and then ask them.
Well, and that's what I wish would have happened when I went through that depression a few years ago. For the most part, I don't think most people knew, because we go out and we go to these networking meetings and we do this, and I could go out and do that, and I could put on a semi-happy face, because people have known me for a long time, knew how I was prior to Bobby's death and then after. But I would, I would do okay. But when I was towards the end of it and, realizing what was happening, somebody in particular, and so I know there was more than one person, could see this was happening to me during this period of time and never reached out to me. But he told me afterwards, he said, he goes, I could tell that you were going through this, and I could tell from your posts on Facebook, I could tell by this, I could tell by that. And my thought was, when he was telling me this, I was like, and I'd known this guy for a really long time, I was like, why didn't you ever reach out to me? Why didn't you ever say anything to me?
Because people don't know what to say.
And so I know that there was more than one person that could tell if he knew. My cousin and my aunt knew. They could tell, and that's when my aunt, she came down and stayed with me for a month.
That's great, though, that she did that.
Yeah, and because she could see it, and she came down and stayed with me for a month, and of course, she wanted me to go to the doctor and get put on meds and this, and I'm like, I don't want to do that. I mean, we didn't even do that with Bobby's MS. I said, I don't want to do that. So she told me, she was like, okay, I'll give you 3 months to work this out. Otherwise, we do it my way. And I'm like, okay, I'll agree with that. And so I was able to do it my way. It's still a struggle at times, not nearly as bad, and I hope it's not going to be a struggle the rest of my life. It may well be, but I'm leaning towards no, it's not always going to be that way. But it takes a lot of work.
Yeah, that's why I like to do, when I worked in nonprofits, everybody in our organization had a safety plan, a coping plan that's written down.
Well, and that's what I wanted, because when we were talking about this a little bit, protective factors, such as a safety plan.
Having a safety plan, for anyone that doesn't know what a safety plan is, one of the things that I like for people to do is to write down those things that they're good at, those things that they enjoy doing. Who's someone that that you could go talk to if you're feeling down? Pick up the phone, send a text, whatever, or whatever it is for you. Most people know what helps them feel a little bit better. Mm-hmm. And like for me, one of the things on my safety plan is, if all else fails, go to salt water, because it's close by. That's when I moved. I moved closer. But we do it prior to crisis, because your brain goes offline when you're in crisis or you're depressed or something else happens, and it compounds it. So if you have it written down in a notebook, I have a template, it's a little business-sized card that has your steps on it, and you can put it in your wallet, you can put it in your glove box, and you have a gazillion copies of it. We
probably need to get some of those to put in the purple folders.
Would be happy to do it. Be happy to do classes, any classes to, if we can teach people how to do it.
Yeah, we're gonna have some stuff coming up here, but yeah, I think those cards like that would be good to put in the purple folders, because our lost survivors, they're at such high risk that that's why we do what we do, and they need the help, because we know we've been there, and it's things that we wish that we would have had that wasn't available 7 years ago. I mean, things are getting better, but it's just, things like that. And have people that, you may know a lot of people and have a lot of friends, but how many of those people and friends, whether it be family or friends or whatever, can you really trust with your mental health and your well-being that you feel comfortable with? Yeah. That gets slimmer.
Yeah. And sometimes people are comfortable and they don't know what to say.
Right.
I mean, that's what happens a lot of times.
Right. And sometimes it's not really saying something, it's just letting people know that you can be there for them and just listen. You don't have to know what to say.
Yeah.
Just be a listener. What's that saying? God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And sometimes just having someone listen and without judgment. I call it
Right.
divine neutrality. To listen, and because that's their story. You have your story, I have mine, and without judgment, with no shame, no stigma. I'm just going to be here. And sometimes it just means just being there, physically being there for someone, or just offering to get them out of the house even, or let's go have lunch, or let's go have coffee,
Right.
and to someone to say, even if we didn't, if I saw that maybe you were down or whatever and you didn't want to maybe disclose, just to say, I just want you to know I'm here for you. Best thing to do is send me a text or give me a call, but I'm here for you if you need me. And to have those kind of people on a safety plan, or to know what to do, but it needs to be written down.
Oh, yeah.
It needs to be written down, and I think everybody should. And I always teach people that I would say if I were making one for myself, just to say to my partner, my friends, my kids, even kids in school that are prone to being bullied or whatever. I'm doing this. This is my project. I want to share with you that these are the things that are on my plan. And I think it would be really cool if you ever need me, if we made a plan for you, and maybe you're going to need it, maybe you're not, but I'd rather have it.
That would be something really cool especially at the beginning of the school year right now.
Yeah.
If there's a kid out there that could just do that, just start something on your own,
Yeah.
That everything starts rolling when just one person starts something.
Yeah. And I'm happy to share that. That's it's one of my favorite things to do, to help people not need to go any further as far as it taking any further steps.
Right. So let's talk about DogStar Transformational Coaching and Consulting.
I've talked a lot about some of the things that I teach and some of the things
Right.
that I do. I have a passion for people. I think I've been a helper most of my life. Unfortunately, I was a people pleaser, and everything didn't always go perfectly well for me. But the death of my daughter and coping with that, what was interesting is the year before Wendy passed away, her best friend from kindergarten died accidentally. But it was not just an accident. It was something that was pretty tragic. And I remember telling her mom that we had been friends, that parents shouldn't have to bury their children. Year later,
You're in that
I'm in that position. And so with DogStar, helping people take that one step at a time, helping them understand what trauma is. And by the way, if you, a lot of times you'll tell people, well, have you talked to a counselor? People, well, I talked to a counselor, that didn't help. And the thing is, when you have trauma, if I blow my knee out, I'm not going to the gynecologist. I'm going to go to an orthopedist, right? Okay, so if my knee's blown, I'm going to go to a specialist that takes care of knees. It's the same thing with clinicians. Not all clinicians are trained in trauma.
Right.
So sometimes it's a therapeutic process, but sometimes people just need support. So to help people get back in balance, especially after they've had crisis, whether it's a death, a traumatic death, helping them understand trauma, what it does to the body, and how to be able to put that one foot in front of the other, how to tweak their habits a little bit so that maybe they get up 15 minutes earlier to move their body or to meditate or pray or those kind of things. And I teach all of those little things. We do the little tweaks first, and it's called chunking. And you have anchors and you chunk the things into daily life. the self-care practices.
I read recently that a really good thing to do first thing in the morning is to get out into the sunlight.
Yes. Photonic light. Photonic light, because our hearts are the magnetic part of our body that work with the brain. They're the electromagnetic. We're really getting into brain science here. But we're in a different part of the galaxy than we've ever been before, and our sun is giving us more photonic light than it ever has. And that affects the magnetism of the earth as well as our bodies. So getting out in that sunlight, and we also know that natural light helps with vitamin D production, but it gives us a more positive outlook.
Right.
And it's not super bright in the morning. So the dog and I see sunrise most every morning because I've usually been up for an hour or two before. I like to get up and get my day done so that I can take a nap and play later.
My cats will wake me up just before sunrise, usually every morning, to eat. And it's just like, really? And the thing is, I have to get up because even if I say, oh, just give me 20 minutes, they're going to be there bugging me for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And that's not going to be restful.
Yeah. Yeah. But all of those things, you know, like the cats, meditation, talking about protective factors and the things that you're good at and keeping that balance. So if you're not living intentionally, you're living the hamster wheel, 40-40-40 life. And a lot of people have a lot of regrets. They look back. I mean, it's what, August now? Almost mid-August.
Yeah.
And you know, it's like how many people had things that they wanted to do back in January with their resolutions. I never make resolutions. I usually have something that I want to move toward, and I intend it. But by being more intentional with what you do every day, making sure that you have some work and some play, you tend to eat better food. I teach food prep as part of some of the programs, some part of the coaching groups, because you can have more time on the weekend if you know what you're going to eat.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times do people pop up on Monday and they don't have anything to take to lunch because they didn't plan? They played all weekend. So building balance in every aspect of our life helps make us more whole, and it pays off in the long run because when something happens, the way back up is shorter.
Yeah.
Those are the protective factors. We learned a lot about in, I think it's 2004, from the people that live in the blue zones, where people live, they have more people living over 100 years than anywhere else in the world. And some of the similar things are they eat healthier, they eat less processed foods, they eat less meat. They may eat meat only 3 or 4 times a week. Their exercise doesn't consist of going and pumping iron. They get out in nature and they play, they garden, they play with their animals, those kind of things.
That's why I say Kim Romanowski will kick me in the butt, but it's like, I don't need a gym. I've got 1.5 acres of land to take care of. You know, but anyway, so what is the best way for people or organizations to get a hold of you? What is your consultation cost? Yeah.
Okay, so for organizations, I teach some of the same things I would teach for individuals or in coaching groups. So I do one-on-one coaching. Coaching groups, once I have enough people that are interested in doing a group, we'll go for 7 weeks. One-on-ones and coaching groups, I don't only do 7 weeks. Very rarely will I do a one-time one-on-one. That's very subjective. I like to work with somebody 7 weeks. I don't want to just give. There's enough information out there.
Right.
I want to actually have people have transformation and results. Consultations don't cost anything because it might not be a good fit to work with me, and I'm not going to charge someone to make that decision.
Right.
So one-on-ones, group coaching for organizations, I can help with training, some of the same trainings that I've done, trauma-informed care, mental health, psychological first aid,
Okay.
safety
How's
plans.
the best way for them to get hold of you?
Text.
Okay. Text Bonnie,
Yeah, text me.
and they'll get all the information. I'm so glad that we were able to get you on here, man. You're just like a wealth of information, and a lot of things that we do and believe kind of like coincide with each other, so it's really kind of cool.
Yeah.
So I'm happy about that. One thing I forgot to do is to thank one of our sponsors for Art for Hope is Annie's Pet Sitting Service. I need to get that in there. She's very helpful, and if you have donations for the fundraiser, she is accepting them at her location, and we'll have all that information on Art for Hope and all of our pages. So, and don't forget to put the Lifeline numbers in your phone. Have these available at all times. Whenever I go out and speak at any organizations, I make people take out their phones and put these in your phone. You never know when you're going to use them. And the call text line 988, it's been out for a year. It's increased the calls tremendously. So, and that one also, press 1 for veterans. And our little inspiration for this week is a ton of bricks that are thrust upon your shoulders by a loved one's suicide never goes away, but you do get stronger shoulders. Wow. I had a hard time with going back and forth with this one for this time, but then that one kept coming back to me because it resonates with me so much, and I can see myself digging out of that a bit. So we always like to end the show with our special saying, just remember, there's always hope. Thank you.